Workshed, a learning autobiography. Gray ash fell gently to the floor, silhouetted against the bright August air. The smell of filtered swishers came rushing into my nostrils as I stared at the small cigar. It hung slightly clasped between his lips. Focused and solemn in his work, he would wait for a trail of ash to gather at the end of the filter, to fall to the ground or trickle down the buttons and cloth of his tan shirt. A line of smoke streamed across his face, leaving a yellow stain at the center of his white, soft hair. And through the line of smoke, a pair of patient eyes held a wood saw handle with docile motion. His strokes pushed and pulled against the penciled line. I gazed at him intently, sweat on my brow from the summer heat, waiting for my turn with the swiveling blade. He took 2 measurements and made 2 cuts as I watched intensely. Holding the metal edge of the tape firmly, I announced to him, "It's ready," and he grabbed the rectangular pencil without looking and marked the 2x4 against the steel square. My eyes fixated on every move. As he finished the second cut, he looked down at me with a smile and asked with a genial tone, "Would you like to do the next one?" An anticipation of relief, a childhood nervousness, crept into my doubtful mind. I answered with a willingness that heard the whisperings of possible failures. "Yes, I would love to," I replied, and he passed me the tape measure. His finger set against the edge of the tape effortlessly as I stretched the tape to the 8-foot mark in the red square. Grabbing the pencil and sure to mimic every observed motion, I made a light mark above and below the measurement. I felt the pencil settle into the pine, and the lead gleamed. Letting go of the tape, my papa passed me the square. It fidgeted in my grip while I lined the edge with both marks and held it straight against the edge of the board. One quick swipe, and we lifted the board to the sawhorses, and I prepared to saw the line. Beginning the cut became a balancing act, with the blade swaying back and forth from my lack of force. He stood waiting and watching, a silent presence amidst my building frustration, and finally the saw began to press its way through the board. When the measurements were complete and the boards were cut, we placed them against the pine floor, peppered with sawdust and open to the summer breeze. With specific instructions, he held the 2x4 in the first X, 16 on center. "Now I'll hold the board in place and you can drive in a nail," he said softly, his cigar stuck to the spit of his bottom lip. My hand dipped into the brown paper bag on the center of the floor, grasping the sharp edges of the spikes, and I retrieved 2. Setting a nail down in front of me, I placed the other sharp point against the pine board. All the while my papa knelt on one knee, holding the 2x4 in place and waiting for the hammer to swing. The worn rubber grip of the E-swing hammer hung from my small hand. I tapped the nail with the head of the hammer, swinging lightly. The nail began its journey into the first 2x4, and moments later the last hitch drove the nail firmly into the other board. We took only a few breaks under the shade of the ash tree next to the workshed, to guzzle water and munch on chips and red hot dogs. We talked about the progressive heat of the day. He would look down at me and ask, "Do you want to keep going, or would you like to stop for the day?" His voice retained a determination to finish the wall. I answered him eagerly, "Let's keep going." The wall slowly formed and rested against the floorboards. He smiled and said, "Okay," almost surprised that I would rather work in the heat of the sun than play with the water sprinkler or go for a bike ride. When the sun began to fall behind the tree line across the street, we were lifting the wall to be placed. My papa stood in the middle and held the bulk of the weight. When the bottom of the wall laid flat against the edge of the wood, my papa placed the hammer in my hand and instructed me to drive 2 nails, one on each side of the wall. He nailed the board against the wall and floor to secure it, wiped the sweat of his brow, and softly spoke. "Well, we're done for the day. Would you like to help me tomorrow?" "I'll be here first thing in the morning," I answered, with tiredness and enthusiasm. The morning came quickly, with the sun filling my bedroom, and the sounds of birds chirping through the screen of my window. A fresh summer air entered my room and awakened me from a restful sleep. After putting my work clothes on and eating 2 jam-topped English muffins for breakfast, I walked across the wet grass toward my papa's house. The screen door squeaked and slammed shut with a slap when I was halfway to the work shed. My papa knelt down to pick up a board. The tools were set out and everything was ready for the day. I greeted him with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, and we started with the next wall. The wall took us the entire day. The heat piled on our heads, and the cool shade of the ash waited for our solemn moments to talk, snack, and hydrate. Each move of my papa's hand mirrored the importance of each measurement. With the completed job in mind, he checked every number twice, made each mark with slow consideration, and peered at each push and pull of the handsaw to supplement a final straight cut. The sun seemed to set early that day, and as I stared at the pink lines of the clouded sky, I realized that I wouldn't be able to help my papa with the final wall. The next morning brought on the first day of 6th grade, and with disappointment, I said goodbye to my papa and went to bed realizing I would not be able to finish the job. The first day of school dragged on, each arm of the clock crawling on the white numbered face. When the last bell rang, I awaited patiently for my bus number to be called. My backpack hung from my right shoulder as I sat practically sideways in my chair. After waiting for 25 minutes, my number came loudly through the classroom speaker. I made my way quickly onto the hard plastic seat, bustling anxiously until the bus reached my house. When the doors opened, I ran toward my front door, threw my backpack against the front step, and sprinted to the shed to see how much my papa had gotten done. I noticed my papa in his vegetable garden, picking potato bugs and placing them into a tin can. He looked up at me, and entering the gate into his yard, I realized that he hadn't worked on the shed. The tools sat still and silent on the floorboards, with the 2 walls that we built standing undisturbed. I made my way to the dirt row of the garden, and he smiled. "How was your day?" he asked. "Good. Did you work on the shed today?" My eyes traveled toward the shed, skimming from my papa's face to the 3 standing walls. "Not yet," he answered calmly. "Would you like to help me with the last wall?" He smirked and held the can of moving bugs. With instant excitement, I answered him, "Let's do it." We made our way out of the dry aisle, and I watched him place the can of beetles on a patch of circular dead grass. He stepped into his storage shed and grabbed the can of gas. The daily ritual of eradicating the striped potato beetles was about to begin. Pouring a splash of gas into the can, he reached into his front pocket, lit a small match, and a blaze of death swayed in the air. The last wall went smoothly. I made the measurements, cut many of the boards, and drove the nails as my papa held the 2x4s in place. We lifted the wall up in time to cap the top, and standing back from the wooden shell, my papa put his hand on my shoulder, gave it a tap, and said, "You're becoming quite the carpenter." "I try," I said hesitantly, with a smile of accomplishment and partial insecurity. The next day, the school's clock crawled up the wall, reaching for the pinnacle moment when my bus would be called. I waited for the doors to swing open, to meet my papa and help him finish his shed. I stepped off the bus and into the dust of my driveway, and I could hear the head of his hammer echo. I approached the middle of the yard and noticed that my papa's knees were at ease against the top of the roof. When I was in view, he made his way down his ladder, and we sealed in the walls and put in a window and a door. We finished the shed, and I stood back and realized that our hard work had paid off. "You did a good job," he said to me, and I agreed. There were many moments with my papa, while working hard and steady, that I would pause and marvel at a finished product. I would take before and after pictures in my mind and remember the square patch of dirt before it became a thick green garden of vegetables. I would remember the shrubs or trees we planted while they were saplings, and slowly they would grow into large, strong trees. And whenever I see the brown work shed, I picture a patch of empty ground before it became a leveled floor, which then became a finished shed, still standing strong. Whether a person holds a hammer or a saw, whether they're telemarketing or driving a skidder, whether one must write an essay or solve a calculus problem, whether a person sings or plays a tambourine, whether someone's in a friendship or a marriage, whether a person nurtures a child or shares a smile, I've learned in the solitary moments and lapses of time watching my papa that what Martin Luther King said is undoubtedly true. If it falls in your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Leontine Price sings before the Metropolitan Opera. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. Our reputation should not be based on the accomplishments of what we've done, but that we are known to have something that drives us to be ambitious. The value of work is the contribution to and completion of the task at hand, and the reward is the right and truth to say, I did a good job.